Okay, well,
Now, welcome everyone to the Alaska Tribal Technical Assistance Program presentation of managing fugitive dust on Alaska's roads and airports. It is being presented today by Billy Connor, who is the director of the Alaska Infrastructure and Development Center, as well as the director of the Alaska Tribal Technical Assistance Program at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And I will turn it over to Billy now.
okay, thank you, Vicki. For those of you who are not familiar with the Alaska Tribal Technical Assistance Program, it is funded by the Federal Highway Administration. It's intended to help the tribes with their issues related to transportation and workforce development. So we do a lot of things. Please visit our website. It's at aidc.uaf.edu/TTAP. And there's a wealth of information there, and we will be adding to that as we get it. And if you have any questions or needs, please contact us at TTAP, and Vicki will route the questions to someone who can answer your questions. So don't be shy about doing that. But the topic of the day is one that I know that is a problem for most villages throughout the state of Alaska. That's managing your dust. And we're looking at both roads and airports, although usually the state of Alaska is dealing with airports, but I know there are a few tribes that own their own. So may be applicable to your airports as well. This photo is kind of an interesting photo. If you'll look carefully behind the first truck, you can see the headlights and the outline of another truck coming down the hill. And if you look all the way up at the top, you'll see a third vehicle going through there. And it's a small vehicle throwing out dust. So we get a tremendous amount of dust being thrown. Okay. So just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about fugitive dust, how it's formed, and methods of how we might be able to do it, some of the work that we've done in the field in the laboratory. And then we're going to talk quite a bit about how to apply different palliatives to the roadway. And there'll be 4 of those, and hopefully we can give you some idea of the alternatives that you may have. But to put things in perspective, there are 1.3 million miles of unpaved road in the United States. 97% of those are in rural areas, so it very much aligns with what we're seeing here in Alaska. And that puts out about 10.5 million tons of PM10. That's 10 micron size material. So that's a tremendous amount of small dust that's being put out. But if we want to look at it in a little different way, if we have a 2-mile stretch of road, which is similar to what many of you have in your communities, and we have 20 vehicles a day going up that road at an average speed of 30 miles per hour, that creates about 11,000 pounds of dust per month. So that's a lot of dust, and that has a number of impacts to the community including degradation of the road surface. As you lose that dust, you're also losing some of the material that you paid dearly to have put down, and it also reduces the quality of your ride. Driver safety due to vision, not being able to see what's in front of you, and then of course health and quality of life, especially for the young and old. Those are the ones that are impacted the most with dust. And we are seeing in the villages an increase in the incidence of asthma and related issues with the breathing, especially in the old. To give you an idea what these sizes are, PM10 is the size of and I'll give you a description of that, but it's 1 micron size, very small particles, and that's a settling dust. It settles out relatively fast, but as you get smaller, you start getting that dust suspended in the air. So you've got one vehicle going across, and it takes a half an hour for that dust to settle out. Well, a couple more vehicles are going to come through and add to that. And by the end of the day, you've got a tremendous amount of dust being created as a part of that. So to give you an idea of what sizes we're talking about, if human hair is between 50 and 70 microns in diameter, that's thousandths of a millimeter. PM10, you could, on that same hair, you could put 5 of those. And then if you put the PM 2.5, you can put 4 of those on a PM10. So you, so that would be about 20. So PM 2.5 is about 1/20 of the size of a human hair. Give it fine beach sand that you may find on the rivers in your area. That's equivalent to about 90 microns. This is what you may be seeing. This was taken in Tanana a few years ago, and you can't even see the vehicle in front of you. Not only can you not see, but you're breathing that, and it's really not very healthy for you. And so what we're going to talk about are means to keep that dust down. A little bit of showing how that is formed. As a vehicle goes by, you're getting dust thrown up by the tires, both front and back. And then you're also getting the air flowing under the vehicle that lofts the dust up in the air, and that rolls it up. I'm sure you've seen behind a vehicle that's rolling up behind and rolling that. And then you get those eddies that are creating that and holding that dust up in the air behind the vehicle. The faster the vehicle is going, the longer those eddies may be. And so it kind of gives you a clue as to what one of the ways we can close it. To look at it a little bit differently, if we got something that's lofting it, in this case, it's a broom lofting that dust. And we also, as the day goes along, we're also getting air moving upwards. That's called convective lofting, which also helps hold the dust in the air. And then we get transport due to the slight winds that may be blowing and moving it across. And it may be in a different direction of what it is on the ground. So that's what transports it into your house. And you may be a couple of blocks away, but you're still getting dust in your house. And I'm sure you've all seen that happening. And then the turbulent air that's up there also helps hold it up in the air as well. And then finally, we get it far enough away from all of that, we start getting some settlement. But that settlement can be tens to 100 feet or more off the roadway. So you can imagine what that can be like in your villages. To give you an idea of how fast that settles out, we're going to look at a particle that's 1/10 of a millimeter in size. It takes about 3 seconds to drop out. 0.05 millimeter takes about 11 seconds. A PM10 takes about 4 minutes. But once you get down to a PM 0.001, which is really fine material, but it does exist, it can take about 5 hours. So if I push the button, you'll kind of get some relative idea of how fast that is. So you can see that if you got turbulence in the air as well, that some of these particles can actually stay aloft for days. So let's talk about some of the methods that we can use to manage our dust. Frankly, one of the best things you can do is build a good road. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do. Interestingly enough, we can reduce dust by adding dust, if you will, the fine grain particles. So on the left, we see the aggregate there with no grain, no fines in it, and all of these voids are created. And so you end up with just gravel on the surface, and that's not holding up very well. In an ideal world, if you get everything just right, you're going to fill all of those voids with a fine grained material, graded material, and that's going to, in effect, glue all of that together. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to separate that coarse aggregate, because that's what's going to carry the load of the traffic. And the one on the right, if you put too much silt in there, you separate those out. And especially when it rains, it's going to turn to mud and you're not going to have it. So the gradation is very important to what you're doing, and we can certainly work with you to get the right gradation for the material that you may have in your community. As I say, too many fines causes muddy roads. Too few fines. This is a great way to find out if you got too few fines. You get washboarding if you got that in your community, and what we call float, which is loose rock on your surface. And if you look over to the side, you'll see a lot of fine material being left over there, which also helps create dust. So if you see that, you really don't have enough fines in your material. And as I say, we're more than happy to work with you to get the right gradation for the material that you have. We also want to talk a little bit about the crown. What you really want is you want the center line of your road to be the high point of the road, and you want to slope off on both sides so that the water runs off. And the point there is you'll find that you get a lot less potholing, and you also get a lot less dust is being created like that. So for a gravel road, you really want between 4 and 5% of the slope on that. And a good way to tell if you're getting that is if you look at a grader when it's grading. And I know that some of you may have gone to some of the DOT grader training, and we're working also here at TTAP to provide you some grader training. We've trying to find some good instructors for you, but look at the end of the blade, and you should see a gap at it at center line, and that's good indication of a crown. If you don't have that, you don't have a crown, and you're going to be causing yourself some problem. So what we want to do is make sure we construct our road. The second method of limiting our dust is by limiting the speed. We have a pickup here going 15 miles an hour. You can see a little bit of dust being blown up there, but if you double that speed, you can't hardly see the vehicle at all. So we recommend between 15 and 25 miles an hour. And it turns out that the ATVs throw out almost as much dust as a full-size vehicle. So don't think that because you've got ATVs in the community that they're throwing up any less dust than a pickup would as it's going down the road. They both got 4 tires, and they're both about the same width, so they're throwing up about the same material. There are, at last count, we had about 250 different palliatives that are on the market, but we can identify those in classes, and we'll talk about that. Excuse me just a minute. The first is water, and water is a very effective palliative, especially if you live in an area where you just have a couple of hours or a few hours of hot weather during the day, and then the rest of the day is fairly cool and high humidity. So water can be a very, very effective tool for you, and it's pretty inexpensive to put down. Some communities have a water truck. Others take an old tote, put it on a trailer behind an ATV, and put some means of distributing that water out the back of that. Both work, and so you choose whatever works for you. Water absorbing products, those typically are salts, calcium chloride, magnesium chloride, sodium chloride, and brine that we can use. What they do basically is they will attract water out of the air and out of the soil and hold it in the soil so that so that the dust doesn't get. So in some respects, it's a water extender. It holds the water down. And we'll talk about that in more detail in just a few moments. We have organic non-petroleum products, and these include vegetable oils, animal fats, lignosulfonates, tall oil. Lignosulfonate is a material that's made out of byproduct from the paper industry. Tall oils are the pitches that come out of pine trees, and is produced out of that. The one that I would not use in all of these is the vegetable oils. What we find and a few folks in Alaska have tried to use it. A great study came out of Minnesota. But what happens to the vegetable oils is as the sun hits it, it goes in and it polymerizes, makes a fine kind of a plastic-like material, which breaks up into a fine powder. And unfortunately, we don't know what the health effects of that polymerized material are. But what we do know is that it goes through that process fairly rapidly. And so vegetable oils are not very effective. And they also attract animals to your roadway because they like that that smell and that taste. There are electrochemical products, enzymes, ionic products, sulfonated oils. These materials um, typically are not really good good materials to use because they are really intended for clays. So we've got that. And I see a question, have we heard of using lime on roads? Yes, people have used lime on roads, but they work best if you're using those lime for clay materials. They don't work very well when you got gravels and silts. So I would reserve those for clays. And what they do is they change the characteristic of the clay to be more like sand. And then we've got pavements. And we'll talk about it's not a new type of pavement, but a pavement that we're working with Quarric on, trying to reduce the cost of pavements out there. This is a great chart, and this may be one of the reasons that you might want to get a copy of the slides. This is by the Forest Service. You can also look it up online, but it lists a number of the products that we have out there and gives you some idea how you might use them and when you might use them, depending on your conditions, the traffic volumes, and those kind of things. So it's a great little chart there that you might want to have on hand to reference as you're making your decisions. So let's talk a little bit about the water absorbing products. Here in Alaska, we use a lot of calcium chloride. Some states use magnesium chloride, but we typically use calcium chloride because it's a little bit less expensive, and we also use it for ice control on our system. So we only have to buy one product instead of two. So if we look at applying calcium chloride on your roads, let's talk a little bit about what calcium chloride is. It's basically a salt, just like sodium chloride, but it tends to be a little bit stronger in that. And it's what the state of Alaska uses, DOT uses, and they also use it for de-icing and anti-using as well as dust palliative. But the way it works, it has a strong affinity for water. And so it will actually take water out of the air, provided that the humidity is above about 34%. If it's below that, it doesn't do so well. I certainly would not use it in Arizona or anywhere in the Southwest because of the dryness. But up here, it does work pretty well. And if you're in a really rainy climate, this might not be the palette of choice because it's actually holding too much water, and it ends up being a little bit slimy for the traffic. So you want to be a little bit careful for those of you who might be, say, in Southeast or in the Kodiak area where it rains a lot. Calcium is probably the second most common palliative besides water. So that's something to think about. Except for water, it is the most cost-effective palliative that we have. DOT is putting it down something on the order of $6,000 to $10,000 a mile for a 24-foot top. It requires minimal equipment. We'll talk about different ways of putting that down. Workforce is minimal, and of course, it's been proven safe when used as a palliative. And to answer your question, Leanne, about it being corrosive, as a salt in and of itself, it is very corrosive. However, we're putting that down at only, we'll talk about it in a minute, but we're only putting 1 to 1.5% of the salt down in the soil. So it's very minimal. And we really haven't seen much issue with corrosion once it's in the soil. But we'll talk about how to take care of the equipment that you're using to put it down. And as a follow-on question you might have is, what effect does it have on the, on, as far as polluting the sides? We have actually taken samples from this material alongside the road, and we can generally hardly detect it, if at all. So that's we really haven't had much of a problem with that either. But we will talk a little bit about some of the downsides of it. In fact, it is an irritant. Um, and so if the kids are playing in the road, they might get dry skin, or if you're playing with the soil that's got it in it, you'll get dry skin. You might get any mucous membranes, and it'll dry them out. But it's not going to be harmful in the long term. That usually goes away once you get water take care of it. It does have a strong bitter taste, but so does sodium chloride. For those that don't know, the reason sodium chloride tastes a little bit sweet to you is because it's coated in sugar. And the reason they coated it in sugar was, one, to get rid of the bitter taste, but two, to keep it from soaking up the water. So if you had pure salt in there, it would stick together and you couldn't pour it out of your salt shaker. It is a bit, as I say, it is corrosive. But once you get it down in the soil, it tends not to be. And if you're working in an area where you're drying your fish, I wouldn't put it there, because as the dust blows around, it's going to have a little bit of that salt in it. And if it gets on your fish, it's going to give it a strong bitter taste. And I don't think most of us want that. And so if we improperly use it, it can cause an environmental problem. For example, as we're putting it down, if we get it too heavy and get some of it on the side of the road, it could be a little bit of an issue for you there. So we have to be a little bit careful. Ideal road materials for that, the ideal road material. First thing you want to do is you want to define your project limits. And that's very important, because that's going to define how much salt you're going to have to buy and how much salt you're going to be putting down. So do that. And then you want to make sure that you've got well-established drainage. What you don't want to do is have your roadway either not have drainage, or and the water set on the road, or you want to have a situation where whenever it rains, you are ponding water. So you want to be able to get the water away from the road. And that's whether you're using palliatives or not. Even on a paved road, the old adage is the first dollar you spend on a roadway should be on drainage. If necessary, we might want to refresh our surface course. And as I said earlier, ideally that we want a 3/4 inch, passing the 3/4 inch sieve, dense graded material, with about 8 to 15% passing the 200 sill. 200 sill is kind of like talcum powder, if you will. And if you were going to pave over the top of it, that would be about 0 to 6%. But if you're going to use it as surface course, you want 8 to 15% to try to hold it together. And ideally, you would like a minimum of about 4 inches thick. And that's because that's the thinnest layer that you can grade, and you want to be able to. So then you want to establish your grade, including your crown, and make sure that the roadway is ready to receive the calcium. And if you have silt, the clean sand, calcium is not going to be a good choice for you, because the silt with the calcium in it is going to attract water, and it's going to turn to mud. If you've got sand, basically what's going to happen is the water's going to run through your sand, and the calcium chloride is going to go with the water, because it's going to be diluted. The application of calcium chloride, we can apply it in a number of different ways. We can apply it topically, just basically on top of the roadway, either in a liquid form or a solid form, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. We can mix it into the soil, either liquid or solid. The ideal application rate is going to be between 1 and 1.5%. And at the end of these slides, I've actually given you some sample calculations. I'm not going to go through those today, but they are attached to the back end of these slides for your use. And if you have any questions, get a hold of us and we'll try to walk through those for you, with you. Our equipment, actually fairly minor. We need, if we're going to apply it as a solid, we're going to need a grader to prepare our roadway. And for that, we need some sort of spreader. And we'll talk about some of those in a moment, but those are readily available. The typical gravel spreader that you can put either in a pickup or in a dump truck or work out really well. DOT surpluses those fairly regularly, and you may be able to pick up one, used one from them. A water truck of some sort. And if possible, it's better if you can have a compactor to compact the material, but you can just run your equipment up and down it slowly, and that will compact it as well. As a liquid, it's very similar. It uses a little bit less material, a grater to prepare it, a water truck because you're going to mix the salt in your water truck. Compactor again is optional, but if you're going to use what we call the super sacks, the 1 yard, 2 ton sacks, you're going to want to use a forklift to lift that up. Otherwise, you're going to be putting in 5-gallon buckets and dumping it into your truck, which works, but it's not be the best solution for you. To apply the solid, pretty straightforward. Shape the road, compact it. Then we're going to loosen up the top 2 inches. And the way you do that is just roll your blade forward and it scratch the road with the blade. Some people call that tight blading, if you've heard that term. And it just kind of loosens up the top 2 inches. We're going to add the salt in its solid form, and I'll give you some of the calculations there in a moment. Add water and compact. That's all there is to it. Pretty straightforward. To mix it in 2 to 4 inches, we're going to basically windrow the material to the center line, add the salt to 1 to 1.5% by weight in the windrow. We're going to blend it back and forth, shape the road, water it, and compact it. A little bit more work to do that, but the advantage of putting it to 2 to 4 inches, for most of you, you can get probably 2, maybe even 3 years out of it before you have to reapply. And that's certainly an advantage to you. To topically apply brine, basically you're going to shape the road, put the salt in the truck, mix it, and then apply the brine and then compact. Very easy process. It's one that DOT kind of bounces back and forth on. Right now they're putting it on solid, but that does work out very well for you. Feel free to throw some questions up there if you like, and we'll try to answer them as we go. If we're going to blend the brine into 2 to 4 inches, we're basically going to loosen the road up to the desired depth, apply the brine, blend it back and forth a couple of times, shape and compact. So it's very similar to applying it topically, except we're just going to work it into the top 4 inches or 2 to 4 inches before we shape it, compact it. Okay, if you're using a water truck, this is the method you're going to use for mixing. Oh, for putting in. Basically, you're just going to kind of dump it in to the truck. What I'd like to do is maybe put a foot or so of water in the bottom, add the salt in there, and then add the water to mix it as you go. What you don't want to do is fill it all the way up and try to mix the salt in. Basically, all the salt is going to go sit on the bottom for you, and you're going to use the addition of water to help you mix. You don't want to pour it right on the bottom because it makes it a little bit difficult. Put a little bit of water in there so that it doesn't clump up on you. I hope that answers the question. Okay. For worker safety, you want to make sure that your workers safe. Remember, this is a fairly corrosive material in its solid form. So we want to provide them with coveralls, gloves, safety vests, safety glasses. And since it's a strong irritant, we want to cover as much of the body as we can to keep it off of that. We also, because they're going to be breathing some of that dust, in fact, some workers like to use a mask. I should have put that on there. You drink plenty of water because that is an irritant, and so you want to make sure that you don't get dehydrated as a part of the process. I suggest providing showers at the end of the work shift so that we can get it out. We don't want them taking it home into the home and trying to take care of things there. It's much better to do that. And you might also consider providing hand creams and body lotions because if your skin gets dried out, it could result in bleeding, and that in and of itself is not a problem. But the real issue is the potential for it to get infected. We don't want that to happen. Equipment, you've really got to pay attention and take care of your equipment. You want to wash your equipment down, both inside and out, to the extent you can. At the end of every shift, don't leave it overnight because you'll come back to a rusted heap of iron, and you certainly don't want that. And then you probably should lubricate it more frequently than you would if under normal conditions. So that's something to be thinking about as well. So you are going to have to take a bit more time to clean up your equipment on a regular basis. How much? We've talked a little bit about target of 1% and 1.5%. Just a quick calculation: if you got 3,500 pounds per cubic yard for your material, which is pretty common for Alaska, if you use that, you would always be right in the ballpark. If you want a more precise, I've given in the slides at the end another way of figuring that out. But we're going to be putting somewhere between 35 and 53 pounds of calcium chloride for that surface course for per yard. So that kind of gives you an idea of how much. Really not a lot of salt for that much material. Here's a nice little chart that you may want to make a copy of and keep around to give you some equivalent application rates. For example, there are two ways that it comes in: flakes or pellets. Some people call it prills that you can apply. So in the case of the flakes, you're going to use 5.5 pounds per square yard for that material if you're topically applying it. For pellets, and it's 0.41 for topically applying it for pellets. And then depending on the liquid concentration you choose, 38 or 35 or 32%, you've got the values per square yard, or gallons per square yard that you're going to put down. So that chart helps you put it together. And this is aimed at topically applied. There again in the end of the slides, if you want to mix it in 2 to 4 inches, there's some computations, example computations of that as well. Okay, before I move on, any quick questions on calcium chloride? Okay, seeing none, let's talk a little bit about synthetic fluids. Synthetic fluids are it's a chemically altered either crude oil, or it's made out of natural gas. It can be made out of coal oil. It can be made a number of different ways, but it's very, very pure oil. All the aromatics and the benzenes and all the things that are bad for you have been taken out. So that makes it environmentally sound in that. You can see this is pure synthetic fluid that's being sprayed in this photo. There is a version of it, AK-35 EnviroClean. They add tall oil to it, so it comes out black. They claim that it makes it a little bit stickier and works a little bit better. In some cases it does, but in some cases it doesn't, depending on the soil type and your application. But Durasol, AK-35, EnviroClean are some examples of that type of material. One of the things I caution you on is when you're putting these kinds of materials down, uh, it has to be really uniform. And this is an example of a uh, application that was put down by a company the first time they put it down, and the equipment they had was inappropriate, and you can see the streaking, and that's on the photo on the right side is what that looked like the next summer. So if you don't put it down, it's not going to perform very well for you. But if you do put it down correctly, you can get a pretty nice uniform looking road segment. Uh, you can see it being put down on uniform road here with the applicator, which is required. Applicators can come in a lot of different forms. You can buy a commercial one. This one is a commercial one that's bought from the folks in Anchorage, and you can make your own. All it is a pump, uh, a spray bar made out of plastic, and what we call snivvies, or um, just application system, and then a battery and a pump and some kind of power source. And it's hooked to a tote pulled behind a four-wheeler. There are commercial trucks that do it. These things can be put out of the back of a pickup. It can be put out of a flatbed, whatever you have to work on that. It's nice to have a compactor that you roll across it once you've encapsulated it. By the way, in this application, we put down 3 passes on that to make sure we got a uniform, and that's with that equipment, that's all we could put out at a time. But you can see how nice and uniform it is on the right photo as we're compacting it, and of course you need your grader to shape your road. So really, 3 pieces of equipment will work for your synthetic fluids. I should also say one of the advantages of the synthetic fluids, it does not freeze. You can store it over the winter or at 50 below. Let's see, I'm trying to think of the company all of a sudden, it escapes me. They're well known. It'll come to me in a minute. But you can, it's one of the supply houses in Anchorage. It supplies fabric and everything else. Here's a nice uniform action with one of the homemade ones. Fellow in Toke did that. He made this out of spare parts around the shop for DOT, and they ship it out, and it worked out just fine. So that this is another way to do it. But the nice thing about it, to go with something like this, is not very expensive. As I say, the production of that, most of you have the skill somewhere in your village to do that. So synthetic fluids are petroleum products with all the aromatics removed. They meet all of the EPA, DEC toxicity requirements. They also meet all of the aviation requirements, so that it does not harm aircraft. It's naturally clear, but you may have some additives such as tall oil put in there. Non-corrosive, that's one of the things. It's going to cost you about twice as much as calcium chloride, but it also has some of the other advantages that we noted, and it's liquid down to -40. Here's a a test that we do here at UAF to determine whether or not it's going to perform for you. And we've done a number of products now. But the one thing I want to share with you is if we put it down at 30 square feet per gallon, it's kind of like paint. If we put it there, we got to, for this particular product, the percent reduction in dust compared to the control, which is an untreated material, we're getting 92% reduction in your dust. So it doesn't totally eliminate it, but it gets it down there pretty low. If you put 40, you'll see it, that bumps up to 85. DOT has a specification and a test method, ATM 316, if you might want to note that down. Yes, okay, thanks, Jeff. Midwest sells it through, oh geez, all right, it'll come to me. Yeah, but yeah, that was the one that we have on this photo was produced by Midwest Industries. Um, 40, but DOT's set the standard at 85% reduction is the minimum that they allow. So this particular product, Polar Supply, thanks, Jerry, Jeff. The Polar Supply is who you want to contact if you want to buy one. But you'll see at 50 that this product doesn't um, meet that 85% standard, and at 60 it doesn't meet it as you can imagine. So I would not recommend putting it down any lighter than 40 square feet per gallon. There's a push to go to 50 and 60 right now, but based on the tests that we have done, and we've done several products now, and not one of them has passed at 50, and pretty much all of them have passed at 40. So just a word of caution there, something that you may want to consider if you're looking at buying that, and if they try to convince you 50 to 60. The other thing you would notice the column lane label standard deviation, that gives us how much it varies. Well, you'll also notice that the variability in what you're putting down goes up dramatically as you increase the application rate. So that's another clue that it's not going to be working well. How long will each application? You know, that really depends on your application, what your traffic is, whether you got curves or you got a steep grade. Most of our villages, we're going to get most of the summer, and some of the more heavier traffic villages, you may have to apply it twice. On an airport, we typically get about 2 years out of it. Okay, let's talk about polymers. Polymers are a kind of a plastic type material. It comes in two forms. It comes in a emulsion form, which the water's already in it. The one that I personally prefer is a powdered form, and you mix it in the soil, and you just simply add a little bit of water, and voila, you've got a nice hard surface. And we've used it on a road down near Wasilla. We put it down, and when I stopped looking at it, it's like these pictures that we're looking at came from Horseshoe Lake in near Wasilla, near Houston. This was put down. I stopped monitoring after 5 years, and it had not been graded for 5 years. Depends on how you put it down. We put it down treated the top 6 inches, so we put a pretty heavy layer down. But you can also put it down with gravels or sands, and of course silts. It will work as well. So it's really tolerant to the type of material. But really, all you need for that is a water truck, a grater to shape it, and a compactor to compact it, and you can put it down, and it will give you a surface much like pavement. The downside is if it gets a pothole, you have to patch it somehow, but the way I patch it is just simply take a bucket and mix some of this in there and just pour it out into the hole, tap it down, and walk away. And it works pretty well. But once it gets too far gone, you're going to have to grade it, and then you get to start over. So as I said, it's available in a powder or emulsion. I personally prefer a powder as I say, for 2 reasons. I don't want to ship the water in there. And 2, I can store it over the winter. If I try to use the emulsion, I cannot freeze it. So something to think about. We did St. Michael's with using a D1 type material or space course type material and 1% by weight of the polymer. And as far as I know, it's worked pretty well. It's in its 2nd year. So we'll be checking on that this fall and see how well it's doing. It can be applied again, either topically. Topically is probably only going to get you about a year, or you can mix it in, and then you can get multiple years out of it. As I said, in Horseshoe Lake, we got 5+ years in there mix. So we had some pretty good luck with that. Leanne, if I can hold that question just a moment, I'll get back to you. Don't let me forget in that. Um, the polymers are very tolerant to a large range of soils. And that's, they had to partially answer your question. Polymers are a good choice for sands. In fact, the photo that I showed you here is a sand from Horseshoe Lake that we mixed. And this is what it ended up looking like after a couple of weeks of sitting on the shelf. So we can do that. We can use it on coarse gravels, sandy gravels. It works pretty well. It does not work very well if you're using it on clays or organic clays. I would not use it there. We tried it. It didn't work at all. So that's not a good choice for these materials. As I say, you can't regrade it without adding, replacing the polymer. And it is a little bit expensive, but if you do a life cycle cost on it, for your applications, it could be cost effective. But it does require you come up with some upfront money to be able to put that down. So I'll also talk in just a moment about cold mix asphalts. Most of you probably heard about hot mix asphalt. That's kind of the golden standard that people like to use. And the reason for that is you put it down once it's cooled, probably within the hour, you can put traffic on it. And people really like that. Cold mix asphalt, basically what we're going to do is we're going to mix the asphalt into the aggregate cold. We're not going to add any heat to that. And we'll looking at that, the mixture is really just a mixture of asphalt and aggregate that's combined without heat. And it comes in two different forms. It comes back in a cutback form, which is basically adding something like kerosene or some other volatile cutbacks that go in there. And it also comes as an emulsion. The work that we have done so far indicates that the emulsion seems to work quite a bit better. And the reason is it breaks. In other words, the water and the asphalt separate from each other once it's mixed, and it becomes a solid fairly quickly. And then you just let it cure out for a bit, but you can put traffic on it while it's curing out. The cutback takes a while for the volatiles to come out. And in fact, depending on the volatiles you use, those volatiles can be in there for as much as a year, which makes a really good patching material, but it does not necessarily make a good paving material. And there are a couple of companies, one we're playing with, and I'm certainly willing to share that with you if you're interested in going down this path, that add a few little different additives to it that help it set up faster and a little bit better. And we've been playing around with those and been pretty pleased with some of these custom blends that are out there on the market. It's just that you always want to test these materials with the rock that you have and come up with a mix design before you use it. So there is that little step that you're going to have to go through. And there are several companies that do that for you. We can do it here, but I would prefer if you went through one of the private labs to do a mix design for you. And we'll certainly be willing to work with them to make sure that they do that correctly. There's a little bit of an art to that they may not have. Equipment's certainly a bit more than you're going to see with some of the other materials. A pug mill is required, and all a pug mill is doing is mixing the asphalt with the aggregate. They come in a lot of different sizes, all the way from a few hundred, a few thousand pounds per hour to 30 tons or to 50 tons an hour, depending on your needs. For most of you, if it takes 2 days to pave, it's not a big deal. So you probably are looking at maybe a smaller one because it's easier to ship and they typically cost a lot less. And I'm hoping somebody would, at some point in time, or go in the business of doing that. Okay, I'll talk about the permafrost in just a minute for you, and which ones are going to be work for that. So we'll get to that in a moment. A compactor, and you can always tell the difference between a compactor, asphalt compactor, and a soil compactor. The asphalt compactor usually has two steel drums, although a few of them do have a steel drum and a smooth tire under here. But you certainly don't want a lug tire. And then there's something, a pull behind paver. Leighton box is one that's good, and it basically hooks to the dump truck, and the dump truck is propelling it along and pulling it along. So they're very inexpensive. They work much like a standard paver as far as the screed goes to level the asphalt out. But as I say, the dump truck is providing the power. You certainly welcome to use a full-size paver. Some people like to do that, but the Leighton box is pretty expensive. And of course, you got to have a dump truck in there. For your purposes, a 10-yard end dump is probably perfectly sufficient to be able to do that. To go to the bigger one is probably not going to speed you up very much because your plug mill is going to be limited. And then you need an asphalt storage tank in that, and it does not necessarily need to be hot. We can we can use it cold, so that makes it a little bit easier. A lot of folks just use like what's here. They just use a tanker off a semi truck to and use that as their storage. And then of course you got to use a loader. You got to move your aggregate to the plug mill and put it in there. And if for some reason other things go bad, like the Leighton block breaks loose from the dump truck and dumps it on the ground, you'll need a loader to help clean up the mess. Okay. Some of the attributes, cure time is based on tailored to be based on the use. So you need to be talking to the producer of the cold mix asphalt cement, because they can tailor it to break within minutes or hours or days. So that's something that you need to think about. The nice thing about it is we're looking at possibly for remote areas about the reducing the cost of actually paving by 50%, because we don't have to bring in a hot mix plant and all of the fuel oil to heat that and all that goes with that. So we're reducing the cost by that, and that's almost 50% of the cost of the equipment that's going into there. It's environmentally friendly. We're not getting the volatiles coming off that we would get off a hot mix. We're not getting the fuel oil burning as a result of that coming off. So, and we can also leave some patch material behind. Sometimes what we do is bring in a tote of, say, the cutback material, mix it up, put it in plastic bags, and leave it in the community for patching material. And when all is said and done, if it's done exactly as it should be done, it's pretty much the same as hot mix. And we have done it with everything with a grater, including the mixing with a grater. But what it often ends up happening, it tends to be a little bit rough and noisy, and people don't like that. So I generally prefer to use a little bit more equipment in that, so that you get a little better product going into that. So I'm going to answer your question about permafrost. Certainly the advantages of some of the materials, such as the synthetic fluids, the calcium chloride, perhaps some of the lignin sulfonate, some of the other products, is you're going to be grading those anyway, and permafrost is not going to, as it settles, be a large burden to you, because you're going to be working that material anyway. However, when you get to the polymers and the cold mix, then depending on how often you have to level and patch, those may not be the best products for you, because they just simply require a lot of work. And you talk to any of the folks in at Alaska DOT, once you pave it, pave the road over permafrost, the workload for them goes up dramatically. And so It's just, it's a trade-off there. So if you really got serious permafrost, the harder type surfaces are probably not going to be very attractive for you. Any other questions that I can answer? I've taken just about an hour. Okay. Seeing none, if anything comes to mind, just drop us a note. There is a means on our website to drop us a note, and we'll be certainly more than happy. Yes, this presentation has been recorded, and as soon as Vicky gets it put together, probably in the next week or so, it will be up online for you. And Vicky will go over that again in just a moment, exactly how you find those. And there's also on our website a webinar that we put together a few years ago as part of the work that we were doing with the University of North Arizona.
Yes, we have links to those through the YouTube channel as well. The AIDC has its own YouTube channel, and it has all of all the presentations are on there, and there'll be a link to the slides in the comment area for that as well. This slide packet, and so Billy has a few more slides in addition to where he ended right here for additional information that he did not include in his presentation today, but are included in the PDF of the slides. You're welcome to download that from the chat if you have not already. And Billy, there's one more question from Leanne that's popped up.
Sure. Yeah. As luck would have it, Leanne, yes, we have tested that material for emulsion products. It's a good material. So we were really happy with the results of that. I would also caution you that the minimum application rate that I would consider is 40. It didn't do all that well at 50 and 60. Which is to be expected, because that's kind of like spraying paint really thin on your wall. It's just not going to cover very well. But yes, that is a good product.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. As I said, there are links through the website as well as the going directly to the YouTube channel to gain access to this presentation. And if you received this from me, you are on our mailing list already. And if you did not receive it from me but would like to receive it, please contact us at feel free to drop me a line or return from this information. Thank you very much. Stop.